Good afternoon, YouTube. Logan Albright here, back with another book review for your viewing pleasure. Today, I want to talk about this lovely Library of America edition of the works of Philip K. Dick, or at least some of his works. There are actually 3 Library of America volumes that comprise his novels. This is the third and the final one. It is Valis and later novels. There's 4 novels in there, and I've been reading through it, and so far I've gotten through the first 2, and I wanted to talk about Valis. Philip K. Dick was a science fiction author. I've talked about him before on this channel. He wrote very many novels. He wrote very many short stories. He was prolific. He's been heavily adapted to the big screen. He is someone that I would consider a genius of a sci-fi writer. And I don't have very many authors that I would call a genius, but I think that Philip K. Dick was a genius. He was also pretty crazy, which, depending on your point of view, might be the same thing. In 1974, he suffered some kind of psychotic break, and he spent the rest of his life trying to process it and figure out what he had gone through and what he had experienced. And the novel Valis that I want to talk about is largely about that experience. It's a semi-autobiographical work. It's very strange. The narrator is the author himself, Philip K. Dick, who's also a character in the book, so it reads a little bit like a memoir. It's unclear how much of it is really factual and autobiographical and how much of it is fiction. But it features samples from Philip K. Dick's diaries, which he called his exegesis. They're sort of mystical, revelatory, apocalyptic texts that he has written down and trying to figure out what's going on about religion and the universe and everything. And those are featured in the book. There's also another character in the book called Horselover Fat, which I'm given to understand is a Greek translation of the name Philip Dick. And he is basically the author as well. He's also an avatar of Philip K. Dick in the book, but he's treated as a separate character. He's written about in the third person. They have conversations. One of them knows things the other one doesn't know. It's a very strange method of telling the story, and it kind of gets explained later on in the book, but it's still very confusing and hard to follow at times because you're not sure if the author is talking about himself or talking about someone else. So that gives you a sense of the style of the book and how strange it is. Basically, the plot is this character, Horselover Fat, has had some kind of a divine revelation, some kind of beaming of knowledge, information into his brain from some mysterious pink light that he interprets as God. And it's unclear whether he's crazy or whether he actually got a divine revelation. And he's trying to explain his thoughts and what he received. And he goes in and out of mental institutions. There's a lot of themes in here that interest me. There's a lot about mental illness. There's something about suicide. It's about drugs. It kind of reads like a 1960s novel, although it was published in 1981. Because there's a lot of kind of counterculture and the scene that Philip Dick was living in at the time when he wrote it. It was actually written in only 2 weeks, so he was a furious burst of energy. It's not that long, but it's 200 and something pages. He really churned it out quickly, which shows that I think it's a personal work for him and something that he'd been thinking about for a long time. The name Valis refers to a vast, active, living intelligence system, which is a feature in a science fiction film within the novel, but it also has to do with the intelligence that Horselover Fat contacts. And so a lot of the book is him just going around trying to make sense of what's happened to him. And I think there's 3 ways to read this book. I think you can view it as sort of the author processing and going through his own issues, which is how I read it. And I think that's an interesting window into a man's mind and a man's soul and everything that he was going through. Who's a brilliant but kind of particularly disturbed individual. You can read it as a science fiction novel with deep, profound, mystical truths buried in it that you kind of have to decode. Or you can read it as a bunch of crazy gibberish and nonsense. There's kind of 3 ways to interpret it. I think it's really interesting to just see the mind of Philip K. Dick at work because I think he's such a brilliant writer. It's a tremendously erudite work. There's a lot of information about theology, history, anthropology, philosophy, literature. He talks a lot about Christian Gnosticism, Valentinianism, Manichaeanism, all these kind of esoteric philosophies. He clearly knows a lot about this kind of stuff and has read a lot about it. There's a little bit about the Kabbalah in there. All these kind of mystic philosophies from long ago that work their way in there. And it helps if you know a little bit about those to read it and kind of make sense of what he's talking about. But he's clearly such a well-read individual and knows so much about these things. He died pretty young. I think he was in his early 50s when he died, so he really accumulated a lot of knowledge in a short span of time, which is pretty impressive. I've talked before on this channel about Philip K. Dick, and I've mentioned that I love his short stories because they're very idea-driven and they're very brilliant and creative, but I don't like his novels that much because the ideas tend to wear out their welcome after the span of a novel, and you need more than that. You need engaging characters, you need good settings, you need a lot of deeper themes to sustain a novel, whereas a short story can be sustained by just one clever idea. And so I think that a lot of Philip K. Dick's novels kind of fail on that regard. But this one I really liked because it felt so personal. It was clearly, meant something to him. The characters felt like real people, which for all I know that they are. They might be people in his life that he knows personally. It was clearly a personal journey for him and things that he was going through, and it really felt like a confession in a lot of ways. It felt like a diary, it felt like a memoir, even though I know a lot of it's fiction. And I liked that. It helped me kind of get more of an understanding of him as an author and him as a person. I think a lot of his other novels come across as very cold and technical and kind of about machines and ideas and thoughts and divorced from reality. This one's more about people and the human condition and religion and trying to make sense of the world that we're living in. So depending on your point of view, I think people could find this novel frustrating and a lot of gibberish and have a hard time understanding what he's getting at and think that he's just a deranged man who's writing down his thoughts. But if you're the kind of person who's interested in mysticism, who's interested in theology, a lot of these kind of obscure contradictory thoughts, ambiguity, things that comprise a lot of Eastern mysticism, Eastern thought, or early Christian thought, I think you might find a lot to appreciate in this book. I think there's a lot there for people who can appreciate ambiguity. There's a lot of ambiguities. It's very unclear a lot of times what's real and what's imagined, whether someone's crazy or whether they're brilliant or have received divine truth. It's unclear whether the things in the novel are really happening or whether they're happening in the narrator's mind or in one of the characters' minds. There's a lot of ambiguity, and so you have to be comfortable with that in order to get through the book. But I quite enjoyed it because I'm a fan of his, and I think it's well written, and I think that it deals with a lot of themes that I personally find pretty interesting. So of the few, which I think there's 3 or 4 Philip K. Dick novels that I've read so far, this one has been my favorite because it's just so personal, and I would recommend it to people who are interested in those kind of things. I also read the first novel in this volume, A Maze of Death, which I'm not going to talk about here, but I like that one too. So if you want to know more about that, ask me in the comments, and maybe I'll do a video about it later. There you have it. That's my review of Valis, Vast Active Living Intelligence System by Philip K. Dick, one of his later novels in this beautiful Library of America hardcover volume. I've been Logan Albright. I'll be back next week with another book review for your viewing pleasure. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Please like and subscribe to the channel and leave comments if there are other books you want me to review or if you have anything you want to say. I'd be happy to respond. Thanks a lot. Catch you next time.